Hello, I'm Dr. Ana Paula Ferreira, an osteopath and researcher from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I'm a teacher at the IBO, Brazilian Institute of Osteopathy. I have a Master in Science of Rehabilitation from Uniswan in Rio de Janeiro, and I completed the PhD in the same program in 2020. I have published papers in interprofessional collaboration with medical doctors from the radiology department of the Medicine State University and also with seniors rehabilitation researchers. I'm affiliated with the Com Collaboration and I am a director of the CABCIN, it's Brazilian Academic Consortium in Integrative Health, that has a partnership with Pan American Health Organization. It's a branch of World Health Organization. I'm also a visiting research fellow of Australian Research Centre in Complementary Integrative Medicine. So I'm a member of the SOLO program, Strengthening Osteopathic Leadership and Research, and I'm a member of Osteopathy Europe Research Committee. It's a pleasure to participate in this webinar.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Draper-Rodi. I'm the chair of Osteopathy Europe Research Standing Committee, and I'm also the director of the National Council for Osteopathic Research in the UK and an associate professor at Health Sciences University. This webinar is to support people who have some but maybe limited research experience and who might have already done a project or a study and they want to publish, but they're not really sure how to do it. If that's your situation, then you are at the right place. It might be people who are experienced with research, but maybe not with the publication process and want to have some tips on how to submit manuscripts and the different processes involved and the different stages involved. So our goal during this webinar is to provide some frameworks on how you can enhance your academic writing and also to give you some guidance on how to navigate the publication process. And ultimately, it's really to try to build confidence in writing for international journals. At the end of the webinar, we'll give some information about live Q&A, where following this webinar, if you have any questions, Anna and myself will be very happy to support you and answer any of your questions. So there are different ways of considering the papers that exist in the literature, and you've read probably in peer-reviewed journals different types of articles. You know, there are some systematic reviews, some randomized clinical trials, case reports, clinical guidelines, commentary papers, educational papers. And all of these papers have different functions, different goals and aims, and might include some primary data, so data that was collected, some original data that was collected for the paper, or others might be synthesizing existing data, what we call secondary research, and others might have no data, like opinion papers, for example, and they support or they put out a theory to then that requires to be tested. On the top right-hand side of that screen, we can see the pyramid of evidence, which is very often used to describe the different designs, and is sometimes sort of simplified as the top being good and the bottom being bad. And I think it requires a little bit of more careful thinking about it. Another way of looking at it is that the bottom of the pyramid, so this background information, expert opinion, is really foundational for the next stages to being able to sort of develop. So we need this sort of expert opinion to start looking at case control studies, case series, and that might say, okay, we need a little bit more data. So let's do some longitudinal studies like a cohort study or, you know, retrospective study. And once we get a little bit of this information, that might relate, if that related, for example, to some sort of effectiveness of a treatment, we might start considering doing, for example, a randomized control trial. And when there are a few of these, then we can start thinking about maybe doing a systematic review with or without meta-analysis. So what we can see from that is that each sort of strata or each horizontal aspect builds on the previous one, so that we can then ultimately build that pyramid. One of the criticisms of that pyramid is that it's really focused around effectiveness, and it misses a large methodology that is used in healthcare, including, for example, qualitative research. So another model that was suggested a long time ago by Jonas, and there are others, is the one on the bottom right-hand side, which is called the evidence house. I really like this model. To me, it really makes sense. And basically, Jonas says, probably in a sort of nicer and more elegant way than me, that in your house, you need to have both a kitchen and a bathroom. And if you have two kitchens, it doesn't make your house better if you don't have a bathroom. So you need this array of study designs to be able to evaluate an intervention or a component of, for example, healthcare from all the different directions. And the diagram is quite small on that slide, and I would invite the people viewing this webinar to access the paper to be able to get a better understanding of this model. But ultimately, what it does is, on the left-hand side, it's telling us how FX testing can be conducted, and that it's sort of broken down based on the audiences, so whether it's for regulators, clinical researchers, basic scientists. And on the right-hand side, it's looking at the use testing, i.e., in the real-world situation, what happens when we when we implement that, for example, intervention. And that can be, again, the targeted audience might be public health practitioners or members of the public or patients. And it's then, depending the sort of function of the research and the audience, it can then try to describe what might be the best research methods and what might be the goals of these projects. And I think that is a much more rounded view of looking at research designs. But going back to the sort of bullet point on the left-hand side, there are different types of papers. Some that would require original data, what we call primary research, primary studies, and others which will be built on existing data, like systematic reviews, which will try to bring together all the articles that fit a strict list of eligibility criteria on a topic. And case reports need to be quite unique, but also have some valuable clinical insights. The clinical guidelines usually would involve expert panels on a topic. Regarding opinion and theoretical papers, they usually need some sort of established expertise. So if someone has very limited experience in academic writing, and they are not considered as an expert by their peers, it would be quite challenging to justify that it would be they would have the authority to be able to write one of these papers. Often these papers are by invitation, so it's difficult to submit a paper if you haven't been invited for one of these. It requires really strong theoretical foundation, and they need to have clear practice implications. So now Anna is going to talk about the sort of two pathways to publication, depending on whether it's research-based papers or theoretical papers.
You heard from Jerry about the pyramid of evidence. This is the traditional one. I also like the Jones approach, the house of evidence, where all kinds of studies are essential depending on the research question. Regarding the publication, there are two pathways to publication. Research-based papers that use real data and they have a clear structure to share improving their finds, which make them easier for the early careers authors. Research-based papers require original data, which can be achieved through experimental or observational studies, whether qualitative or quantitative data. Experimental studies involve an active intervention, and the most rigorous form is the randomized control trials with high levels of control. There are also observational studies that involve passive data collection, where researchers observe their subjects without interference. Some kinds are cross-sectional to collect data at one point of time, used for prevalence, cohorts to follow a group of individuals over time, case control studies to compare individuals with a specific condition without others without this condition, and also the diagnostic and validity studies are observational. Observational studies are commonly used in epidemiology. And the systematic reviews, they are all on the left side, I will approach later. On the other hand, on the right side of the screen, you have the theoretical or opinion papers that need lots of expertise and to suggest or critique ideas. These papers don't necessarily need new data, and they are also often have a high entry barriers as needed pre-approval of the editor. Theoretical or opinion papers include positional statements, educational pieces, clinical commentaries, and practice recommendation. There are many challenges for theoretical papers, as it usually requires established expertise. They are usually written by invitation only, and theoretical papers present also a higher rejection rates and require strong theoretical foundation, need extensive literature review, and usually clear implication for practice, and also they have limited journal options. Not all journals publish theoretical papers. Clearly, theoretical papers are not for research in the early stage of their career. When setting the goals, it's key to keep them realistic and achievable, so it's not for beginners. Let's explore other options and consider different approaches. One option is to do a systematic review of what is read out there. Systematic reviews follow a strict methodology as formulate research questions, to develop a protocol, establish a search strategy, to conduct a literature search, screen for titles and abstracts, review full text, extract the data, analyze and summarize the data, assess the methodology quality and the risk of bias of each individual study included, and to interpret the results to draw conclusions based on evidence, considering also limitations and implications for practice. There are a few reasons why a systematic review might be done. One is to confirm or refute whether current practice is based on relevant evidence. Another is to establish the quality of evidence. And the third one is to address any uncertainty or variation in practice that may be occurring. There is also a scoping review. Many people confuse these two types of reviews. A scoping review main aim is to map the existing literature on a broad topic or research area, so it's more broad than specific as a systematic review. And also it aims to identify the key concepts, theories, and knowledge gaps. It's important where additional research is needed. It can be more flexible regarding the inclusion criteria and does not typically assess the quality of studies. Scoping reviews are essentially useful when it's unclear what other more specific questions can be asked and answered by a more precise systematic review. Other options would be clinical commentary based on case series. Case series is a descriptive studies design that examine a group of patients with a particular conditions, or those who have undergone to a specific treatment without the use of the control group. Case series are particularly valuable for studying rare diseases, unusual diseases, new treatments, or expected adverse effects, providing insights that can inform clinical practice and guide future research. Also, there are case reports. It's to document management of one patient with emphasis in a presentation that are unusual or where there are unexpected side effects as well. So here you have a reference on how to write case report from an osteopathic patient. There are also educational pieces with practical examples, collaborative papers, and letters to editor in response to a published paper, especially when the paper is not well written. Now Jerry will continue with what do you need to know before you begin writing.
Okay, so now you want to write your paper and you are facing your computer with your document open and you wonder where to start. Well, before starting to write your paper, there are a few things to check to ensure that if you submit the paper, it is likely to being accepted, or whether there are some red flags that will lead your paper to being rejected, what we call desk rejected. So the editor of the journal will decide because it's not meeting the minimum criteria, it will be rejected straight away. So first of all, do you have your data? Is the research completed? Are you able to submit that data analyzed in your manuscript? The next thing is regarding ethics. Did you receive ethical approval for your project? Not all projects require ethical approval. That is depending on the jurisdiction where the study was conducted. So each country have different expectations or requirements regarding ethics. But have you ensured that your project was conducted in line with the ethical requirement in your country? And if there was no ethical requirement, do you have something to justify that? Was your protocol registered, if applicable? So now within the open research movement, all projects should have a protocol registered. This is something that is free, that is fairly quick to do, depending on the type of research you conduct. If you do some clinical research, like a randomized controlled trial, whether it's a feasibility study or a main trial, then clinical trials is the best database to submit this. If you do a systematic review, you can submit, for example, on Prospero. And finally, if you have any other type of protocols, for example, a scoping review, a qualitative study, a survey, all of these, you can submit them on the Open Science Framework, or OSF. But all of these will need to be pre-registered. You need to have prospectively registered them before starting to collect and analyze the data. And that once you have submitted your protocol, it is time-stamped, which means that the reviewers will be able to see when the protocol was submitted and take that in account with when the manuscript was conducted and or data collected from the manuscript. So did you get a protocol registered? Was it prospective? If it's not prospective, it's not a deal breaker, but that's going to raise potentially red flags for the reviewers. Is your data analysis complete? Because the results will really inform different aspects. So it will inform your discussion, and the discussion to some extent will inform your introduction. What you will discuss, it needs to be concepts that are accessible to the readers, and therefore you will need to introduce some of them in the introduction. So do you have access to the whole analysis and the implications of that analysis? Can you then infer what will need to be described in the introduction and discussion? Again, we will talk a bit more about the structure of the article later in this webinar, but that is before starting writing. I would suggest that some of these elements need to be there. Regarding the data analysis, if it's not completed, there are still things you can write. For example, the methods section can be written quite early on, because that's something that you can do even if the project is not yet completed. And I guess the earlier you start, the more likely you remember, key details about your methods. The key findings identified, I've already sort of discussed about that, but that is really important to start drafting, at least in your head or maybe on paper, what the discussion will discuss and what the introduction needs to include. There are some other aspects that you need to consider. The agreement with co-authors. Anna will discuss later about what are the sort of rules and requirements for people to be considered as an author of a paper, but is that clear who should be a co-author on that paper? And are you aware of the recent literature on the topic? So if the project was conducted some time ago and now you're going back onto your project to start and write on it, if you had written maybe a dissertation or something with your project, maybe the background literature needs to be a little bit reviewed to check that you haven't missed some key articles on the topic. So once you're ready to write your article, I think it's better to decide which journal you will submit before writing your article. Each journals have their own expectations or guidance on how to write an article. So some of the sort of general rules will be transferable from one journal to another, but there will be some, particularities that you want to abide to quite early on, and therefore ensuring that you are quite clear about where you want to submit would be better. I've put here the International Journal of Osteopathic Medicine. I'm on the editorial board of that journal, so I've got a massive conflict of interest. I'm not doing this because I think that's where you should submit, but just because I think that's a journal where a lot of osteopaths usually submit articles to. But everything I'm going to say from now on is applicable to any journal. So when you choose your target journal, you have some sort of decision factors to take in account. For example, do you want the article to be open access or to have what we call traditional access, i.e. it's behind a paywall, and unless people have access through their, for example, institution, they would need to pay a fee to access the paper. The first one, open access, require the author to pay usually quite a large amount of money, around 2,000 to 3,000 euros per article, which means that all readers can access the article for free. If it's the traditional model, then the author do not have to pay for the article to be published, but readers will need to have some way of accessing it, either by paying themselves to access it, or institutional access, or maybe sometimes through their regulators or professional associations, they might have access to some journals. The impact factor was something that was quite important for a while, and now it's becoming a bit of a less important factor or aspect of publication, but impact factor relates to the amount of references to articles published in the journal in the last 2 years. So it looks at the sort of activity and how likely articles will be picked up from being published in that journal. The problem is there are so many differences depending on the discipline. So, for example, if you look in immunology during COVID, impact factors were increased for some journals in a very skewed way, and very disciplinary journals like in manual therapy or osteopathy the impact factors tend to be much smaller because it's within a very small discipline that they are being used and potentially referenced. And then another thing is the scope and readership. So it's not because you are writing on something related to osteopathy that only an osteopathic journal would be interested. There are other journals, for example, if I take my own experience, I've published not so long ago in the BMC Medical Education, and that was around osteopathic education. And we have published in other journals around, we did a systematic review around bullying, harassment in osteo, physio, and chiropractic undergrad education. And that was again in a fairly broad journal. So there's the discipline, but also the topic. And the topic can give you other potential journals that could fit with your article. One thing that can guide you is to look at articles that you've used maybe to inform your introduction, where they were published, and that can help you to identify potential journals that could be interesting for your article. I've already mentioned the publication costs, which are whether the paper is in open access or not. And if you work in an institution, big universities have sometimes agreement with some publishers, and you might have access to open access through your institution. So that's something that is worth checking with your institution and maybe with the library team who might be aware of these arrangements. The timeline for a paper to being accepted is usually published on the journal website, but I think it's fair to say that it's a long process. And if we put aside predatory journals, which accept articles within a few days or a few weeks, most articles will take at least 6 months or usually more to be from time of submission to time of acceptance. And the different types of papers that Anna mentioned earlier do not have the same acceptance rates. So if you submit primary data, the acceptance rate tends to be a bit higher because there's something novel, there's something useful that you present. When theoretical papers, we've already discussed that it tends to be on invitation only, and from experts, and the acceptance rate, if you submit that by yourself without being invited, tends to be a bit lower. So I've already described earlier that each journal has its own requirements. So that is a series of screenshots from the IJOM guide for authors. And if you go on their website, then you would see that all of these different bullet points would have hyperlinks that take you to a section that fully describe that. But for example, you can see on the sort of middle column, writing and formatting, that it gives specific instructions on how the title page should be written, what should be included in there, the abstracts, the keywords, the tables, and so forth. So all of that information will be different on different journals, and that's why deciding quite early on which journal you want to submit to will help you not to have to reformat the whole of the documents and all of that. It also provides a little bit of information about what happens, like you can see at the bottom of the second column, submitting your manuscript. On the right column, after receiving a final decision, what happens. There are some resources that most publishers offer to try to get a bit of support. Some of them you have to pay to access them, and others are for free. But these guidelines are really, really key. So you have to go there quite early on because they will define things like word limits. How many words can you include in an article? And that tends to depend on the study design. Primary data and editorials do not have the same number of words, but also they are different per journal. So you have to look at that. The reference styles differ between journals. Again, Anna will talk about the different reference software managers that exist, and they can sort of switch from one style to another. So that's quite easy to adapt if you use a reference manager. How to build your figures, tables. So all of these things are quite important. Also, it explains what you can put in supplementary material. And one thing we will discuss later is around the article checklists, the reporting checklists, ensuring that you follow the guidance and you have often to submit that checklist filled in when you submit your article.
Now let's talk about the reporting guidelines. The EQUATOR Network is a platform that provides a collection of reporting guidelines for different types of research studies. The main ones are the Consort for randomized controlled trials, the PRISMA for systematic reviews and meta-analysis, the STROBE for observational studies, and the CARE for case studies, case reports, and the standards it's the standard for diagnostic accuracy studies. These guidelines, all of them, help to ensure that the research is reported in a consistent and transparent way, no matter what the research design is. There are also reporting guidelines for protocol, for instance, Spirit 2013. It's defining protocol for clinical trials, and the PRISMA P, it's from 2015. It's a statement reporting for systematic reviews and meta-analysis protocols. And many journals publish protocol. So if you have a good protocol, you might consider to submit for publication. You can access all these guidelines through this QR code that will lead you to the EQUATOR page. But keep in mind that a good protocol is an essential step in producing a suitable manuscript for future acceptance for publication. And if you have a good protocol, you have half of your manuscript read. Another important part of publishing is build a good research team. This means clearly define each person's role and responsibility. This is based on the ICMGE authorship criteria. It's from International Committee of Medical Journals Editors. And following the 2023 authorship criteria, it specified that to qualify as an author, someone must satisfy 4 key conditions. The first one, to make substantial contributions to the conception or design of the research, or to the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of data. The second one, should be involved in the drafting of the manuscript or critically review it for important intellectual content. The third one is to give the final approval of the version to be published. And the last one is to agree to be accountable for all aspects of the work, ensuring that questions relate to its accuracy and integrity are being addressed. Ideally, all the 4 criteria would be met by each author, and for those who do not meet these standards should be just recognized in the acknowledgement and not be listed as authors. This will make sure that everyone contributes in an ethical and responsible way. This framework also shows what each person will do, and the need for a statistician in the beginning of the process. So if you don't have one, look for one in your team. These will make sure that the data analysis and the methods will be good. It's also important to find mentors. Mentors can provide guidance and share expertise. My suggestion is from the beginning, you build your team, You discuss all together which will be each one responsibility. And so important as building your team is to have effective communication, managing the communication team. That will ensure that all members will remain productive throughout the project and the process. These elements make the research process more efficient and contribute to build authority in your field and to build a strong reputation. Regarding a manuscript structure, a well-written research paper usually starts with a title and abstract that describe the research. Next, there is an introduction that explains the context, the problem, and the goals of the research. The method section explains the study design, procedures, and statistical analysis, so others can repeat your research or your study. Then the results section presents the findings in a clear way using text, tables, and figures. And next, the discussion section explains the findings in the context of other research, highlight the important points, the limitations, and ideas for future research. And finally, the manuscript ends with a conclusion section, followed by the acknowledgement, reference, and any supplementary material that supports transparency and proper source attribution. Jerry will further explore the title, abstract, introduction, and methods.
So the title and the abstract are really the shop front window of your article. As I'm sure you're aware, with social media, most people only read the title that is part of the link being shared under the image, and sometimes some people will read the abstract. And that might be the only information that people take from the article. So this is really, really important to take time to consider how you can craft an effective title that is going to convey the key messages to the readers, and what information should be in the abstract, almost to try to, have readers thinking, oh, I need to know more, I want to read that paper. So you want to draw attention from the readers. These also have clear instructions, so different journals, different rules, but on the word limits, the structure of the abstract might change a little bit, and the at the bottom of the abstract, you will also have to select some keywords. These keywords are often organized as a sort of tree decision-making thing, and the journals will help you deciding on some of these, but or at least the platform where you submit will sort of guide you in the sort of selection of these keywords. But one thing that is really important is that your title and your abstract reflect your article and mostly reflect your results. So there's a big problem in healthcare literature which is called spinning. Spinning is when the title or the abstract or sometimes the discussion or the conclusion do not fit with the results, and we try to make it sounds a bit better. And it might be that a randomized control trial tested the difference between two interventions, and no differences were observed between the two interventions. And rather than saying that in the abstract, the abstract could say both interventions were as effective. And that is really, depending on the design and depending on the sort of hypothesis of the trial, it's likely not to be reflecting what was found, and that is called spinning. So you don't want to say something different from what is in the article, in the title and abstract. So if you have a flower shop, you don't want people to think that you sell groceries. It has to be really clear what was in there, and it has to be transparent, rigorous, honest, and that's really, really important. And unfortunately, that's something that is very common in healthcare and including in osteopathy, where title and abstracts do not meet what is in the article. Regarding the introduction section, there are different things that need to be presented. We talked earlier about the fact that the introduction is here to provide key information around maybe key terms that need to be defined, but also if there are concepts that will be discussed in the discussion, then they need to be introduced early on in the paper to make sure that people are au fait of the different aspects and components that are required to understand the article. So often there's a bit of a background information that is provided and that would use existing literature. So it's really providing a bit of a sort of, context of the field at the moment, but also looking at previous work that has been done in that area. So you might be doing a study on a specific topic, and maybe in a different profession they did the same thing, or in the same profession but some time ago using a different tool, and that's where you sort of explain what do we know, what is the sort of state of the knowledge in that area. And that is where this sort of field discussions brings us to what we don't know. What is the gap in the research? What is the gap in the knowledge that we have identified? And that is really how we justify how this article, how this research was important to conduct, because we didn't understand, we didn't know, there was confusion around X, Y, Z. And that leads to our research question and the aims and objectives. So this sort of funnel approach is how most introductions would be expected to be constructed. We start quite broad on the topic, that's the sort of key terms, why it's important to talk about that. Then that's what has been done, what is conducted, what we know on the topic, but there are elements that we don't really fully understand. Our research question to try to answer that problem is, and the aims of the study was, and that's how we would expect the introduction to being constructed. Regarding the method section, the method section is really your recipe. What did you do? So you don't provide any data about your project, but you give your recipe book to the readers for them to understand what was done. So that would be, you describe the design of your study, how you recruited your participants, so where maybe the advert about the project was disseminated. So, people can start understanding, okay, so I can see that the participants of that study might be different or might be similar to, for example, the patients I see in my own clinic. How the data was collected. So these were the processes we put in place. And people can start thinking, okay, were there potential biases, or how did they ensure that the biases were limited? So it's really providing this sort of guidebook on how the study was conducted for others to being able to understand that. How you had planned to analyze, so your sort of statistical plan, ethics that you had received, protocol is not listed, but where the protocol was registered, and so forth. So there's quite a large level of detail that is required. And at the bottom of that slide, I've put again the EQUATOR Network screenshot that Anna mentioned earlier, which is the sort of guidance on how to report studies. And depending on the sort of type of studies you do, let's say you are doing a systematic review, if you look at the PRISMA checklist, it will tell you exactly what you need to report, in which order, in the method. So your recipe will be highly informed by the checklist on the EQUATOR Network. For theoretical papers, the method section tends to be a little bit looser. So some theoretical papers do not have a method section and others have some. And it might be around how they sort of search the strategy, the type of analysis they conducted for their work, how they sort of define what would be included and excluded in their paper, how they sort of synthesize the data. It's becoming a bit more common to see a method section even in theoretical papers. They tend to be quite short at the moment, but most theoretical papers in the past didn't have one. So for some studies, because of the word limit, it can be difficult to put all the information required in the method section. And that's where having a pre-registered protocol is really helpful, because a lot of that information of what you are planning to do is in there. So to some extent, some elements can be in there, and some journals would accept to say, for more details, please see the pre-registered protocol. But nevertheless, the method section would still need to describe in great detail most of the methods employed. Usually the method sections are written in the passive voice. So rather than saying we contacted blah, 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 saying participants were contacted. It's quite important to describe the statistical approach. So rather than just saying descriptive statistics or inferential statistics, to say which software was used, which tests were employed, whether, for example, the statistician was blinded, and how all of these elements are really important. And finally, about the ethics, having a clear, and that the journal would provide what they expect, but having a clear statement about which ethics, research ethics committee provided approval, and on which date, and what was the number of the approval is something that would be required too.
Results section. In a research paper, the results must encompass the following components: the presentation of data, tables and figures, and the statistical analysis results. A clear organization is essential for the successful presentation of the research findings. In case of theoretical papers, you can see on the right side of this list, it should include the following: the synthesis of existing evidence, the arguments that support the author's claims, implications for future practice, and the theoretical framework upon which the paper is based. The aim of the results section is just to describe your findings, what you saw, without adding any comments or discussion. You don't need to go into the methods again here, because there's already been done in the methods section. Just give the results. If you read carefully the methods section, and I suggest you read before writing the results, you will remember what the methods were used. So you don't need to comment or interpret, because it's it's unacceptable in the results section. You have to describe the results for every methods in the method sections, and to make the paper easier to follow and read. It's a good practice to present the results in the same order as the methods, and using subtitles in the similar style of those in the method sections can break the results down into an easy to follow section. A normal paragraph of results should start by mentioning the type of analysis, but not describing. For example, if you described in the method section that you use ANOVA to compare groups when the primary outcomes measure was, let's say, headache impact test or NDI, neck disability index, you may write at the end of the study, ANOVA showed a statistically significant difference on the overall neck disability index score between groups, and present the values. Then it should the results describe the results that were found, and and to point to tables and figures. For example, the table 4 shows the correlation analysis between X and Z. As for the method section, the results should be presented using the past tense. For example, board maps show the statistical evidence of a weak and positive correlation, and so on. A lot of researchers wonder where to describe the results in text or to use tables and figures. There are not an strict rule, but generally you can write up the results that can be described in few lines in the text. Tables should be used for data like baseline characteristics, outcomes, and treatments when the same variable are described for two or more groups. Tables usually have the most important information about the results, and they alone give the reader a clear idea of your findings. Figures are also useful, especially when the source data is too complex to present and not easy to understand. You can show relationships and trends in the figures. Figures include flowcharts, plots like line bar graphs, scatter and forest plots. And depending on your target journal, you may be limits to the total number of illustrations, figures, and tables. So you have to check the guideline before including too many. Also, do not include too many illustrations, the reader will lose interest. And most importantly, do not repeat data that's already in the table or the figure. It's bad practice when writing. And also in the results section, do not bring references. References are for the introduction and the discussion. And do not explain what you did. This you have already done in the methods. And all results should be related to something that you have explained before in the method section. The discussion section of a research paper is where you analyze and interpret the findings of your study, providing context and comparing with the results with existing literature, acknowledging the limitation and proposing direction for future research based on the finds of presented in the results section. In essence, the discussion section explains the meaning and the significance of the study's outcomes. So you can start by recapping the main find of your study using the same formulation you used for the primary objective in the last paragraph of the introduction, and the primary outcome that you describe in the method section. Then interpret the results. When you are interpreting the results, be careful not to just repeat them or over-interpret them. Keep it factual, and remember this is a scientific article. For example, if you say in the results, my concerns here is with shifting the interpretation that can undermine your original data. For example, if you say in the results that after administration of the treatment X, no patient experience adverse effects, it's not correct to say in the discussion that all patients who will receive the treatment X won't experience adverse effects. This is a shift in interpretation and can damage your work. It would be more accurate to say our results suggest that treatment X may or might not produce adverse effects, or it might be safe. It's important also to put results in perspective with other reports or other research. How do your results compare with other reports in the literature? If your finds are different, do you have any plausible explanation for that? What are the possible discrepancies in circumstance, population, or approach that may explain what you observed and why you observed it? Any particularly surprise or interesting findings should be in the discussion section and should be discussed along with potential explanation. So you have to give explanation for everything or ideas why it works or not, or why it's different or it's similar. Can your finds be extrapolated to other contexts or other populations? So you say that if not, why not? For example, if you are studying just women, we can put this evidence on men. So you explain why did you choose to just perform a research in women and not a men. If you did a bench of analysis or intervention, don't focus on individual results. You have to explain what the overall significance of the results is when you put all the tests and analysis all together. Of course, during the discussion, you will want to describe what other authors have reported in a similar context to compare with your own finds. But remember to be diplomatic when criticize the work of others. Instead of point out the weakness of other people's work, try to rephrase to show the strengths of your own work. The implication will be obvious without you having any explicitly criticize your colleague publication. For example, instead saying that John Doe's study was underpowered, it can be helpful to use a softer tone and a more cautious wording, such as John Doe's study may have been underpowered, or better yet, our study had sufficient statistical power to detect blah blah blah. In the context of a direct comparison, this will implicitly suggest to the readers that John Doe's study may not have had sufficient power. Again, careful proofreading by all co-authors and senior mentors or members of your publication department, if you have one, will help you to avoid these pitfalls. About references and formatting. A number of popular tools exist for management of references of manuscripts. There are some examples here: Mendeley, EndNote, Zotero, PaperPile, Citation Machine, and JabRef, and they might be others. These tools are considered reference management softwares and can assist you in organizing, storing, and automatically generating citation for research papers. Some of them allows you to store the PDFs, the papers as Mendeley, and others not, but you can use all of them. The most commonly used citation style in the health field is the American Medical Association, particularly for medical research and public health studies, although the American Psychological Association may also be used depending on the specific area of their health research. There are video tutorials that can be easily found on YouTube or internet. While writing your manuscript or even protocols, avoid missing the references, otherwise you have doubled your work. And there is no fixed rule, and each work can have a work routine. I prefer to use one author. Just one author will be responsible for formatting the manuscript and adding all the references. So while we are working on the text, everyone who wants to add a reference can put it on the comments. uh, it's just one way. It seems silly, but be sure to save the versions to identify which is the last one, to avoid getting lost in so many versions of your manuscript. Regarding the amount of words, in general, 2,000 to 5,000 words are accepted for reviews and original articles. And a well-formatted manuscript, we use a page A4. The font size should be 12 and can be written in fonts such as Times New Roman or Arial or Calibri, and have regular margins and paragraphs with double spaced.
So when you submit the paper, well done. That's, a big chunk has been done, so that's fantastic. You will need to have quite a few documents ready for you to do this. So that's done online on a platform that takes you on the different aspects of the submission. You will need to add the information required. But usually you will need a cover letter, which is a letter where you write to the editor-in-chief and you are trying to demonstrate why it's worth for their journal to peer review your article. So you're trying to prevent them thinking, well, that's not really in the scope of the journal, it doesn't sound to be very good quality. So you want to demonstrate that it's worth for their readers and it's rigorous and of good quality enough for them to think it should be included in their journal. There will be a list of documents that you will need to include. So we already talked about the checklist for the article that was included, should be in there. There will be an author statement. Often now we use the credit statement to describe who, i.e. which authors participated in the different aspects of conceptualization, data analysis, draft manuscripts, and so forth. And then you often have some copyright forms to fill in, or some boxes to tick to say whether you want the article to be open access, i.e. you will need to pay a fee, or whether it will be behind a paywall. So on the right hand side of that screen, that's an article we submitted some time ago around, it was the urgent study where we looked at the experience of students from underrepresented groups in osteopathy studies during their undergrad training. So it was a mixed method study, so we can see that there is a supplementary material number 1, which is the GRAMS reporting, which is the checklist that we use to follow and to report the information that was required. We had the cover letter, we had a couple of figures, we have the manuscript, supplementary materials, 5 of them, a table, and then we had a title page. So that is all the things that were required for the initial submission, and then they are other aspects, but we will talk about that later, around the when you revise what sort of information you need to do. And this has to be really clearly following the guidance, otherwise usually it might not be a desk reject, but the people who check the manuscript before sending that to the editor-in-chief or the reviewers will send it back to you saying this doesn't follow the expectations, you need to do X, Y, Z. So the closer you are to what they expect, or as much as you can, you need to be really, really close to what they expect, otherwise it will bounce and go back to you, so you make the changes. So after the submission, it will go to the sort of technical check, as I said, and you might bounce back if you need to make a few tweaks. Then it goes on to the editor-in-chief, who might manage the article themselves, or they might send that to another editor. The editor will check whether the article is of within the scope, or if there are massive red flags with it. If it seems to be within scope and that it doesn't seem to be massive red flags, then it will be sent to peer reviewers, at least 2, sometimes more, depending on the journal and the size of the journal. And once the editor-in-chief has received feedback from usually at least 2 reviewers and sometimes more, then they make a decision. And there are different types of decision. It's never accepted straight away. So it can be minor revisions, major revisions, or reject. And then that information is sent from the editor-in-chief to you. You might know who the reviewers are. Quite often that information is hidden, so we don't know, the peer reviewers do not know who the authors are, and the authors do not know who the peer reviewers are. And sometimes it's open peer review, and so all the identity is known, and when it's known, everyone knows about everything. Some journals have also open peer review, in the sense that when the article is accepted, then all the sort of peer review comments received and the responses sent and all that is archived with the article, so that readers can see all the different changes that have been conducted. So once you receive the article, if you've been lucky, then you have minor or major revisions to make, and you have a sort of time frame to do that. And usually it's not a very long time frame. It's within a few weeks that you have to make changes. What is really important is to try as much as possible to answer to the reviewers' comments. So rather than saying, well, no, we decided not to do it, or, really think carefully. These people did it for free, took time to provide feedback on how they think the paper could be improved, enhanced. So really try to consider how you can take that on board and how you could try to implement this. So that's an example of a letter to the reviewers, where highlighted is our response, but that's the feedback we received. Thank you for the opportunity to review this interesting manuscript. I don't have extensive statistical skills, so my comments will generally not be technical. Firstly, a detail online, blah, blah, blah. So response, thank you. So, when you start your response, thank the reviewers, very basic thing, but being a reviewer myself on several journals, sometimes it feels that the responses might be a little bit abrupt or almost impolite. So, again, thank you for identifying this inconsistency. At the beginning of the project, there were 8, da, 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 da. So just explaining. And as much as possible in your response, say where the change was done. So here, line 1 to 8. So that the reviewer can read your response, go to the manuscript, look for line 1 to 8, see the change being made, job done. Another thing that can be done is you can copy and paste the change within your response, so that with only reading the response letter, they might accept whether you have made enough changes for them to be satisfied with the quality of the article. And once you've made all of the changes, then journals again have different rules, but some journals have like for you to submit the manuscript and all documents with track changes on, so that people can easily see what you have changed, and another copy which is clean with no track changes, so all changes accepted. But then again, there are some journals that ask you not to have track changes on, and only a clean copy. So, when you receive the response from the editor or editor-in-chief of the journal, they will give you guidance on what they expect when you resubmit your article. So a paper might be rejected. That is not very common, but that can happen. And it can be because there are really massive flaws that cannot be fixed. For example, you did some primary, you did an article, an RCT, for example, a randomized control trial, and you didn't get any ethical approval, then the journal will not accept that to be accepted. But often it won't go to peer review. It will be desk rejected by the editor-in-chief. But if it got missed by them, then it would be the peer reviewers would highlight that as a major rejection reason. But it might be because the methodology was poor. There were too many biases in how it was conducted. It was such a small sample size that effectiveness couldn't be tested. So it could be really strong methodological errors or limitations of the project. It might be the writing, the quality that is not good enough, although I think nowadays with online tools for translation or improving English, including AI, I think it's likely to become less and less common because we have now tools available to help us for when we're not English native. It might be because there is some selection in what was reported, and that may be from the protocol. It was said that these outcome measures would be collected, but then in the manuscript, only a few are selected, maybe because only these were decided that would be meaningful by the authors, but it looks like there are a high risk of biases, selection biases, in the outcome measures reported. The format might not be suitable. It's too long. It doesn't really follow the guidance of the journal, or the quality of the format is not good enough. The scope might be a problem. So, for example, at the IJOM, there are a few papers which are submitted around osteopathic lesions. So, like metastasis and other bone pathologies, and that's not the scope of the journal. And therefore, it's not because the paper is not good, but because it's not the scope of the journal. So then the authors receive a letter saying, thank you very much, but that's not what the journal is about. Osteopathy is a discipline, healthcare discipline, and we would suggest for you to look at other journals that may be more suitable for the topic of the article. I've already talked about the ethics concern, or it may be because the article is really similar to what already exists. It doesn't really bring anything new to the body of knowledge existing. So if the quality is a bit limited, a bit poor, it doesn't bring anything new, then there is not really any justification to publish that article. Saying that, more and more is suggested that we should try to replicate articles, replicate studies to see if we can get the same findings. So there is value in replicating studies, but if it's not really trying to replicate, it's just quite poor quality and on a topic where we have quite a fairly clear answer, that might not be strong enough to being accepted.
There are many resources and support, so look around. Patient report outcome measures, PROMS, are used to assess patients' health status. So PROMS are standardized, validated survey instruments to assess patient report health outcomes in areas such as general health and quality of life, or specific symptoms, functional ability, and physical, mental, and social health. In osteopathy, specifically, patient report outcome measures can be used to gather anonymous feedback from patients and enable osteopaths to reflect on how patients respond to osteopathic treatment by asking them how they feel before the treatment and how they feel after the treatment, or 1 week after, or in other times. There are many publications for any core, and the PROMS project is supported by Osteopathy Europe. Another resource is the Practice-Based Research Networks, the PBRN. There is also a pediatric one, PBRN. PBRN is a group of clinics or facilities that work together with a coordinating organization, such as Orion is from Australia, Osteopathic Research and Innovation Network from the School of Public Health in University of Technology, Sydney, and also EQUATOR Research Networks. These PBRNs are very helpful in making sure that research questions and results of studies are based on and directly relevant to everyday care, to practitioners and to patients. Another resource is the Osteopath Practitioner Estimate and Rates, OPRA. It's an online survey, osteopathic survey. It's used to collect data from osteopathic professionals all over the world. And the survey's objective is to generate data sets and establish reference points for osteopathic practitioners. But there are also other support and resources as Osteopathy Europe Research Committee, online resources, writing groups, and mentorship opportunities. Here there are some tips to help you achieve success. Begin your preparation early. Start getting ready to publish your manuscript early. It takes time to get a manuscript published. Get your team together, set regular meetings or call, set deadlines, and make sure everyone is working together. The second one, to follow the guidelines. These will be your most important reference, so you must know it very well. So go to the guidelines. Next one is to seek feedback to improve your work. There are always generous people willing to help you if you are really committed to your path, believe me. Be thorough in your work. If you are planning RCT, it's useful to run a pilot study first to make sure that everything will work well. Keep an eye out for confounding factors, which are basically any variable that could influence the results of the study but isn't the main focus of the investigation. For example, if your main outcome is pain, so psychological status as anxiety or depression, sleep quality, lifestyle factors as physical activity level can create distortion in your results. If you are doing a systematic reviews, make sure you search several databases. The more, the better. The next one is to keep accurate records. Keep accurate records when you're collecting data, making sure you have all the records regarding the date of the extraction, excluded the participants if a clinical trial or reasons. Also, you have to let the ethics committees to know about any change to your research. If the ethical approval is needed for your research. For example, if you were collecting in a facility and it was a flood or a fire and you cannot do the collection there, you have to inform, or any change in your protocol, you have to inform the ethical committee. So review everything before submission and build your expertise in your field. So focus on developing your expertise, on getting better at what you do. Sometimes we focus on things we already know how to do. But to build expertise, we need to challenge ourselves by making a considerable, specific and sustained effort to do something we are not good at or we cannot do at all. So that's how we build our expertise. So identifying what you are interested in, focus in one task at a time, start with the most important, invest time and effort, set specific goals, and get to work. We learn doing things, and having someone more experienced can really help you.
Ana and I will host a free Q&A session for those of you who have listened this pre-recorded webinar. So that will be on the 22nd of May 2025 at 12:30 Central European Summer Time. Registration is free but mandatory, so please use the QR code on the right-hand side of this screen, or the link that should be inserted in the comment or in the description of this video on YouTube. During the registration process, you will be invited to list any questions you have for us, and you will be able also to ask questions during the live Q&A session. So looking forward to seeing you there.
So thank you so much. I hope you will feel inspired to think about publishing your paper.
So thank you very much for listening to our webinar. We hope that you have found that useful, and we would like to thank Osteopathy Europe for hosting this webinar. And the live webinar will enable you to ask questions you have on how to write an article, and Ana and myself will be delighted to help and support you and answer all of your questions. Thank you. Goodbye.